In 2012, Anchorage police was conducting an investigation on a string of burglaries and car thefts, which led them to a hotel called the Merrillfield Inn. As two officers were searching one of the rooms, Jason Barnum opened fire on them from a bathroom. A shootout ensued in which both Barnum and an officer sustained injuries. Both ultimately recovered, and Barnum was arrested. He later admitted to committing the crimes to support a drug habit. After he'd been released from prison in 2010, Barnum claimed that he couldn't get a regular job because of his beautiful face, referencing his extensive tattoos. He had the white parts of one eye inked black, which led to him being known as Eyeball. That same half of his face was covered with a skull tattoo. Barnum's artwork also included a skeletal face atop his head, an eye in the middle of his forehead, and a crown of thorns around his skull. For the robberies and the shooting of an officer, Barnum was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Number 8. Shannon Stevens. On February the 13th of 2021, Shannon Stevens, along with her brother and his girlfriend, had taken snowmobiles to a yurt in southeast Alaska. Stevens went to an outhouse, which was about 150 feet from the yurt. Immediately after sitting down, she felt something biting her backside. The others heard Stevens screaming. After she jumped to her feet, the woman saw a bear staring back at her through the toilet seat hole. Stevens immediately alerted the others, and they ran inside the yurt, where she was given first aid for her bleeding wound. The next morning, the three found tracks on the property, but the bear had left the area. They believed that it had gotten inside the outhouse through an opening at the bottom of the back door, and had likely been using it as a den for the winter. The circumstances of the attack are considered rather unique, and an expert subsequently argued that the bear hadn't bitten Stevens but more likely had swiped her with its paw. Number 7. Tyson Steele. Started in mid-December of 2019, Tyson Steele was forced to brave the unforgiving Alaskan winter for 3 weeks. He was living in a cabin made out of tarpaulins and planks in the remote Susitna Valley. On the 16th of December, he'd put a big piece of cardboard in his wood stove, which sent sparks through the chimney that ignited the roof. 30-year-old Steele awoke to fiery drips of plastic pouring from the ceiling. He rushed outside and saw the cabin was engulfed in flames. The man was heartbroken upon realizing that his Labrador Phil had perished in the blaze. The fire ignited a propane tank and hundreds of rounds of ammunition, which destroyed a significant portion of his food supply. Steele spent the first night in a snow cave before improvising a tent around the wood stove. He kept it burning using tree bark and a candle. The man stamped an SOS in the snow, which he then covered with ash. He survived his ordeal by rigorously rationing his remaining canned food, all of which reportedly smelled like burnt plastic. After spending 3 weeks stranded in the Alaskan wilderness, he was spotted by a rescue helicopter. Number 6. Chenin Placencia. In November of 2019, Alaska man Chenin Placencia was arrested at Anchorage International Airport. The 71-year-old was returning to Kodiak when the authorities asked to check the large fish box. He checked his luggage. Officers found pieces of frozen meat, and Placencia agreed to it being thawed for further investigation. However, he withdrew his consent as a police dog approached the package, prompting the authorities to obtain a search warrant. As the examination of the contents resumed, investigators found roughly $400,000 worth of drugs hidden inside rotten goat intestines. The plastic-wrapped packages contained about 389 grams of methamphetamine and 740 grams of heroin. Placencia claimed he'd bought the meat from a California rancher and denied knowing about the drugs. However, it hadn't been the first time he'd been faced with such charges. According to a tip noted in court documents, he'd smuggled drugs in the past using a lamb carcass. Number 5. Gary Cazares. In July of 2011, Gerardo Adan Cazares Valenzuela committed one of the largest cash heists in the history of Alaska. The man, who went by Gary Cazares, was working as a cash vault services manager at Key Bank in Anchorage. He was alone in the building on Friday, July the 29th, working late on the pretext that he was organizing an ice cream social for the bank's customers. Cazares turned off the lights and entered the vault with a rolling cart and several boxes. According to an FBI affidavit, he loaded $4.3 million into the boxes before driving away and boarding a private jet he'd previously chartered. On Monday, bank officials realized that he'd also time-locked the vault, which bought him even more time before the theft was discovered. Cazares and his girlfriend bought a Ford Fusion. They drove from Seattle to Tijuana, Mexico, where they abandoned the car and boarded a bus for Sonora. As they passed through a police checkpoint, the authorities decided to search the multiple suitcases and duffel bags that the couple had with them. They found a handgun, an AK-47, boxes of ammunition, and $3.8 million in cash. Cazares spent 7 years in a Mexican prison before he was extradited to Alaska and sentenced to an additional 10. Number 4. Austin Pfeiffer. In September of 2020, an Ohio moose hunter was fatally mauled by a grizzly at Wrangell St. Elias National Park and Preserve. With a surface of over 13 million acres, roughly 6 times greater than that of Yellowstone, the park and preserve make up the largest area managed by the National Park Service. 22-year-old Austin Pfeiffer and a partner were on an unguided hunt in the remote Cottonwood Creek drainage. They'd killed a moose and split up while packing the meat up to camp. The partner was returning to the harvest site, and within 50 yards of it, he was charged by a grizzly. He shot in its direction and the beast veered off. He then found Pfeiffer's lifeless body at the harvest site. He'd been mauled to death by a grizzly in what appeared to have been an ambush attack. There was no evidence that Pfeiffer had tried to defend himself. In the 40 years since the park and preserve had been created, it was the first documented fatal bear attack. Number 3. Christopher McCandless. Shortly after graduating from university in 1990, Christopher McCandless started traveling and hitchhiking across North America. His ultimate goal was to reach the Alaskan bush and live off the land. McCandless, who during his travels also went by the nickname Alexander Supertramp, arrived in Fairbanks in April of 1992. A local electrician gave him a lift to the start of a rugged track outside the town of Healy. The man was concerned about McCandless's safety in the unforgiving wilderness. After noticing his lack of experience along with his meager rations and minimal equipment, McCandless found an abandoned bus which he used as shelter. His journal documented 113 days spent in the area. At one point, he tried returning to civilization, but the path was blocked by the swollen Teklanika River. He didn't have a topographical map and thus didn't know that just half a mile downstream was a hand-operated cable car that crossed the river. McCandless ultimately died of starvation, potentially exacerbated by eating poisonous vegetation. In early September, hunters seeking shelter found his decomposing body in a sleeping bag inside the bus. His story served as inspiration for the non-fiction book Into the Wild and the eponymous 2007 film. While many romanticize McCandless's travels, others, particularly native Alaskans, have criticized him for taking on the wilderness completely unprepared. Today's topic was requested by Mohammed Mukrias. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Victor Simpson. In April of 2017, an Alaska man tried to take his own life and in the process, accidentally shot his girlfriend. Victor Simpson and Brittany Mae Hagg, both in their early 20s, were high school sweethearts, living together in an Anchorage apartment. Simpson was reportedly drunk when he tried to shoot himself in the head. As Mae Hagg tried to wrestle the gun out of his hands, Simpson pulled the trigger. According to a report from the authorities, the bullet pierced his skull at 9 o'clock and exited at 11. Because of the position the couple was in, the bullet went through the man's head and fatally struck Mae Hagg. Simpson survived and arrived in court wearing a helmet designed to hold his skull together. He pled guilty to accidentally shooting his girlfriend and was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Number 1. Robert Hansen. Robert Hansen is arguably Alaska's most notorious and prolific serial killer. From 1971 to 1983, he preyed on women in and around Anchorage, claiming at least 17 victims. Hansen was first arrested in his early 20s for burning down a garage in Pocahontas County. which was seen as an act of revenge for his unpopularity in high school. During his subsequent incarceration, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, with periodic schizophrenic episodes. Hansen was reportedly obsessed with getting back at people he felt had slighted him. In his youth, he'd been extremely shy, suffering from severe acne and a stutter. He thus didn't receive the female attention he craved and developed gruesome revenge fantasies. As an adult, Hansen owned a popular Anchorage bakery, which effectively acted as a front for his double life. He would pick up sex workers in downtown Anchorage and then force them at gunpoint to his cabin, following extensive abuse and torture. Most of the victims were flown out to a secluded area. It was there that Hansen hunted them as if they were wild animals, before fatally stabbing or gunning them down with his Ruger Mini 14 rifle. 17-year-old Sidney Paulson, one of Hansen's last victims, had managed to escape from his car while he was busy loading the plane's cockpit. She then reported him to the authorities, who searched his house. They found jewelry and clothes from the victims, an array of firearms, as well as an aeronautical chart with marks over sites where bodies had been discovered. When confronted with extensive evidence, Hansen tried to justify his crimes by blaming his victims. He was sentenced to life plus 461 years and died in prison from health complications in 2014. Thanks for watching. Be sure to click on one of the links on your screen for more videos.